Lesson 8. Viewpoint and stand towards the world that proceed from man's interests. This lesson is on the viewpoint and stand towards the world that proceed from man's interests. Viewpoint and stand of approaching the world proceeding from man's interests is man's viewpoint and stand to defend position befitting master of the world. Leader Kim Jong-il said, "Taking a man-centered attitude towards the world means approaching the world from the viewpoint of interests of man, the master of the world." Approaching the world proceeding from man's interests means approaching the world in view of making everything in the world serve him better. In other words, it means placing independent demand and interests of man above others in cognitive and practical activity, analyzing and appreciating value of all things and phenomena with them as criteria, and making everything contribute to man's interests. Viewpoint and stand of approaching the world proceeding from man's interests enables to place independent demand and interests of man above others in cognitive and practical activity, and with them as criteria to analyze and judge value of all things and phenomena. Man's all activities to cognize the world and himself and transform them are always based on appreciating the value of things and phenomena. Value is preciousness and utility of things and phenomena. Objective things and phenomena have values, but the values are judged by man. Preciousness and utility of things and phenomena are decided by how precious and useful they are for man. Man makes efforts to cognize and transform things and phenomena only when they are understood as the useful and precious ones, through appreciation of their value. Continuous new cognitive and practical activities of man are always made by the appreciation of value of new things and phenomena. Whether man analyzes and judges value of things and phenomena correctly or not, and the achievements made in cognitive and practical activities are decided by which man considers as a criterion of appreciation. Value of things and phenomena can be correctly judged only with the independent demand and interests as a criterion. Man must always place his independent demand and interest before others and judge value of things and phenomena with it as an absolute criterion. Only then can he select a proper object that suits to his interests and conduct activities to cognize and transform it in a purposeful and conscious manner. Viewpoint and stand of approaching the world proceeding from man's interests also enables to deal with everything so that man's independent demand and interest can be placed before others in cognitive and practical activities and realized better. Man cognizes and transforms the world not for its purpose, but for the realization of his independent demand and interests. Man judges value of things and phenomena to distinguish the ones that conform to his independent demand and interest from the ones that do not, and on its basis to deal with them in favor of him. Only when man places his independent demand and interest before others and solves all problems in cognitive and practical activities in conformity with it, he can transform the unfavorable into the favorable and the favorable into the more favorable, thus making everything of the world serve him better and shaping his destiny successfully. Approaching the world proceeding from man's interests is immediately approaching the world in view of the masses' interests. Man's interests, the criterion of all cognitive and practical activities, are not the interests of an individual who is divorced from society, but the interests of man, the social being, who lives and acts as a member of a social collective. It is not the greedy individual's interests, such as accumulation of individual wealth or lust for career, but the interest of a social being, the popular masses, who are desirous of living and developing independently, free from all fetters and subjugations of nature and society. That is why the viewpoint and stand of approaching the world, proceeding from man's interests, is in essence the viewpoint and stand of analyzing and judging everything and solving it with the masses' independent demand and interest before others. It is necessary to approach the world proceeding from man's interests, because man is the master of the world and his interests are most valuable in the world. Man is the most precious being in the world, and nothing more precious than his interests is in the world. All things of the world have value only when they serve interests of man. Only the thing useful for man's existence and development, and necessary and favorable for him, can have value. Therefore, man, the popular masses, should consider their interests as a criterion and proceed from it to approach everything of the world. Viewpoint and stand of approaching the world, proceeding from man's interests, has two basic demands. President Kim Il-sung said, "Man is the most precious being in the world. Everything in the world has value only when it benefits man and serves him. Therefore, it must be established as the supreme principle to defend man's independent rights and interests, and everything in the world must be subordinated to bringing about man's independent aspirations and demands." One of the two basic demands is to establish it as the supreme principle to defend man's independent rights and interests in all activities. It means establishing it as the fundamental purpose of cognitive and practical activities to defend man's independent demands and interests. By what the purpose of activities is defined and established is an important issue deciding how man approaches the world. Purpose and object of man's activities must be established with his independent demands and interests as the main. Man's demands and aspirations of life are immediately the independent demands and interests, and it is the fundamental interest of man to realize them. Independent demands and interests are the standard that decides the content and level, scientific accuracy and validity of the aim of man's activities. The aim established with the independent demands and interest as the main principle can only be a genuine one which encourages all activities of man to make in conformity with his independent nature. Another of the two basic demands is to subordinate everything in the world to bringing about man's independent aspirations and demands. It means making all problems contribute to bringing about man's independent aspirations and demands. Man's independent rights and interests are not brought about of their own accord, because defending them is established as the supreme principle and a fundamental aim in all activities of man. People's activities are made in a detailed manner in ceaselessly changing circumstances and conditions. Therefore, the supreme principle that defends man's independent rights and interests can be realized successfully only when people's detailed activities are consistent with bringing about man's interests. Man must always subordinate all problems bringing about his interests in cognitive and practical activities to solve them. Man must subordinate all problems in his activities bringing about his interests, whether the problems are big or small. Only then can he defend his position as the master of the world and live and develop with dignity. Today, man has emerged as a powerful being who makes everything in the world serve him. Viewpoint and stand of approaching the world, proceeding from man's interests, is the fundamental stand and attitude that enables the people to defend their position as masters of the world and strengthen it further. Thank you for this lesson. Next lesson, we will study the viewpoint and stand that considers man's activities as the main.